my father, and I couldn't drink but my father, roll like the fourth of a cold.
It is easily one of the greatest sporting accomplishments ever.
Maccabi carried the hopes of a nation.
Shalom everybody. We're so pleased and honored to host here on Explore Israel two amazing filmmakers, Dani Menkin and John Weinbach. Before we start a discussion which I hope will be very interesting, let's see a clip which expresses some of Dani Menkin's work over the years.
It is easily one of the greatest sporting accomplishments ever.
Maccabi carried the hopes of a nation. It just came out of my heart.
I knocked him but my father, and I couldn't drink but my father, roll like the fourth of a cold.
Hi, Dani Menkin and John Weinbach. Welcome to Explore Israel.
Thanks for having us.
I noticed that you have a few things in common besides being filmmakers. You both started off as sports correspondents.
It's true.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So you got very far.
Yeah, it's true. Johnny, but you started like also on the Wall Street Journal, right? And
Yeah, no, I came to the world of film and television through journalism, and I still kind of look at every project through that lens of, hey, what's the story? We got to report it out. Who are our voices? Who are we going to talk to? And and then sort of made the transition with fits and starts into entertainment. First working on a show for ESPN, then I went back to the Journal, and then was able to kind of do this life full time, starting about 12 years ago with ESPN.
And it was when I worked on the map, the story of Maccabi Tel Aviv beating the Russians during the Cold War, that I heard, there is another producer in the United States looking into this same story. And I said, how dare him? So I did what Israelis do the best, and I threatened him over hummus and told him, let's meet up. And since then we were like inseparable because we loved the story so much, and John helped me bringing on the map to the American audience, and I think the rest is history.
Okay, so today we're going to discuss 4 projects, 3 by you, Dani, and 1 by you, Johnny. The 4 projects we're going to discuss are On the Map, Olsi, The Last Dance, and Pictures of His Life. Let's see a short trailer about On the Map.
Basketball was the #1 topic in Israel.
When I got there, I was really surprised because inside me, I realized that we had a chance to do something.
Maccabi Tel Aviv playing for the European Cup Championship? Are you kidding me? Who are these guys?
It wasn't that long after the war. The country was starving for something that lifted the country.
Moshe Dayan was the most recognizable face in the world except for Muhammad Ali. He was at every one of our games and shaking our hands, and afterwards the battle begins.
Moshe Dayan coming to shake the other team's hand is an intimidation.
For the Russian team, they knew that they had the best team in Europe that beat the American team in the Olympics.
Red Army Moscow had all of the great players from the national team. Maccabi carried the hopes of a nation.
My first thought was, damn.
There was no reason to expect Maccabi could beat Red Army Moscow.
The streets were empty. You couldn't get a taxi. Nothing moved. The excitement was just too much. I wanted more.
There are some things that are more important than sport.
It is easily one of the greatest sporting accomplishments ever.
All that excitement, all that pride, it just came out of my heart.
אנחנו במפה ואנחנו נשארים במפה, לא רק ספורט והכל.
On the map, I want to tell you that I have a personal touch with On the Map because I grew up in Israel at the time that all these events took place. And I was part of that emotional, amazing feeling of the victory of Maccabi Tel Aviv over CSKA Moskva, of the Moscow team, and then, of course, the European Cup. And you cannot take it out of the context of the Cold War and the environment and the feeling of Israel as such a small country having this victory over Moscow, which was like a giant at the time. So many issues involved here. Dani, tell us, what made you decide to take this project?
These guys were my childhood heroes. I mean, we are 1977, and I remember it's like almost my first memory that my dad is lifting me up, and we're going to Rabin Square. We're celebrating the first ever victory of Maccabi Tel Aviv European Championship. Same day that Rabin resigned from office, everything happens. It almost felt like the history touched that year, that moment, that time. My all-time favorite movie is Forrest Gump because it combines the history of the country into an underdog love story. And when we were in the edit room, we said like On the Map and what happened to Tal Brody combines almost the entire history of the country into the journey of that team. Right. So that was our way to make it bigger than life. I'm actually writing it now as a screenplay to make it even bigger than what the documentary did, but I think that's what was the core of what we tried to achieve with the documentary.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because when the first version that I saw was a film done for the Israeli audience, and there were things like the Yom Kippur War and Entebbe, which were just sort of thrown off like in a bite from an interview because obviously the Israeli audience has seen that, and I think it helped the film, frankly, to have a little bit of an outsider perspective to say, hey, wait a minute, hold on, there's like an incredible story here. If you throw in the context of what's going on politically and everything like that, that I think the Israeli audience takes for granted. And that if you add that back in, it makes the stakes even bigger than they were. And one of the great discoveries of making the film was this connection between Tal Brody and Bill Walton. So I've interviewed Bill Walton, one of my favorite humans on the planet, and I've interviewed him for several projects. And we were reading his book, and I thought, Bill Walton might be a good person to talk to about this, knowing nothing about the relationship. And the fact that not only did he know Tal Brody, but considered him like a really important person in his life, because Tal and Bill got to know each other, when Bill was 18 years old. And so, in classic Bill Walton, it's like, Tal Brody saved my life, and it was great. And that was a really, really memorable interview. And he was really emotional, and, sort of all that brought to bear is just, like you said, a story that jumps from the sports page to the front page. And that's the kind of stuff that I like to get involved with.
I think Maccabi Tel Aviv, from the beginning, it was a national issue. And Forrest Gump is like the personal story interwoven into public events or national events. But Maccabi Tel Aviv was seen from the beginning as the representative of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
It reminds me of two biblical measured things. One is David and Goliath. We always saw ourselves as David against this Goliath and Maccabi Tel Aviv against Moscow. And the same is the Hasmoneans, like those courageous people who go out and try the impossible. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for one of the things that you want to show in the film, and John and his team even worked on it at The Last Dance, is try to make your character as an underdog. How can you make Michael Jordan an underdog? They succeeded. They showed all the battles, all the challenges of making him overcoming things that are impossible to comprehend. So one of our job, very easy job, was to show that Maccabi Tel Aviv could not even go to the second round. They have bunch of guys that never made it to the NBA, and one that gave up on the NBA, and then they are facing the Giants. But they are facing the Giants and they are winning because they understand that they are going to make an impact on the entire nation for years. And that's the spirit of who we are, and that's what makes this story, in my view, bigger than life.
Yeah, it's also quaint. It's like this timepiece as well. I mean, there's one of my favorite lines. It's like from Yair Lapid. He's like, in 1977, we were a country without air conditioning. I love these things. I mean, look, the first time
There was no color TV.
Look, the first time I went to Israel in 1984, obviously there were some things, many things were there the same, but it was like Kinley, Beasley, and it was really, really hot. And you think about the way Israel has changed. I mean, look at Maccabi Tel Aviv. I don't think it's overstating things. They're one of the top 5 franchises in the world outside of the NBA. Yeah. They are, first class in every way. And so the change, I think, for people who, are under 30 now, who have no thought of Israel as that kind of country, it's I think, pretty fascinating.
Before we talk about Olsi, we'll see a short clip.
Yep.
Where do I start my story? When I was 13 and a half, gangs were all the way across. I only could stay 2 blocks, and no blocks there.
Basketball was his way out of the ghetto.
I was young. I knew that he loved me, but I knew that he loved basketball too.
I saw him play, and I said, I want you to come over to play in Israel.
Where?
Olsi Perry was Michael Jordan and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar rolled into one. He turns himself and his team into the kings of Europe.
The moment he looked at her, that was it. I think it was love at first sight.
She was the big European model, one of the top 10, and he was the basketball superstar.
It was a phenomenon in the late 70s.
Tammy wasn't sure she would marry him. They were the first mixed couple. She was Jewish and he wasn't.
With all the joy and excitement, inside it was a dead feeling. I started to take a lot of pain pills. He was in Tommy's apartment. He wasn't really moving. She was scared he was dead.
He was different. Cuckoo, different.
I always knew one thing, that I wanted to tell you my story, the way it is.
Okay, we're going to discuss Olsi, which is an inspiring story about Olsi Perry, African American from very difficult circumstances, environment, who became an icon in Israel, became a legend in Israel. So perhaps let's open with a few words of why you decided to express the story.
For me, Olsi Perry was the first movie that I really wanted to make. When I thought that I'm going to come to the United States, I live now in LA, and I'll make movies here, I said, okay, what can I bring to the Americans that they don't know? And it's kind of like in my backyard. And it was always Olsi. So I started by writing a narrative film about him, thinking that, and always pitching and saying that, he's our Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, not knowing that I'm going to work with one of the creators of the movie about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And even seeing him,
Met Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
meeting him together at the premiere. But Olsi Perry was so huge for us and such an icon, and again transformed from the sport section to the news by becoming an icon and the power couple with Tammy Ben-Ami, which was, the top model of Israel. So imagine they were not only the Berjolina. How can I describe it? It's like a Mars Stoudemire and Gal Gadot will start dating. It will not happen. And multiplied in trillions because it's the 70s. Israel have nothing. And it puts Israel on the map in basketball. And then Olsi Perry disappears because he starts to suffer from his addiction problems.
Right.
And the idea is that we wanted to show also how Olsi fell in love with the country, but also how the country fell in love with him. And especially in times like now, and by the way, the film, people will ask where it's available. It just started to do festivals, then the corona started, so we've frozen it and we are going to resume with it towards the end of this year. But what we really wanted to show is that there is such an incredible bond between an African American and Israel. And we know that Jews and African American have the same bond. Olsi suffered all his life from discrimination, from racism. And he found the Jews and the Israelis in the new country that he came to, understanding what he is and never judging him for that color. And that's why Israel never forgot Olsi and never gave up on him. And Olsi never gave up on the country. So I'm so excited because to have somebody like Olsi coming with, I will say, love letter to the country and a love letter from the country to him is incredible for us. And
it was a real love affair from the Israeli side. I mean, he was loved by the entire
Yes.
state.
Well, it's just a uniquely human story. And when you think about the context of when it happened, you mentioned the context from Maccabi Tel Aviv. I mean, the fact that this happened in the 70s in Israel, when it was less of a citizen of the world than now, and people would have, especially in this, Dani mentioned the time we're living in now, but if you think about what Olsi and his journey said about Israel then, it's even kind of more astounding because it was, at war, still very much on the, let's call it second world status on the global stage. Now you think of Israel as so first world, so forward in so many ways. And yet at that time, he was able to make this journey. And it's really kind of in a category of one. I mean, there's not many I can think of. You can think of it some in the United States or in England or wherever. But a guy to go to the Middle East and in Israel at that time to become sort of a pop culture icon, a sports icon, disgraced, come back. I mean, it's like out of a movie. Yeah. So that's what I was always drawn to. And I remember when we were making, even on the map, it was like, Olsi's story is almost as good as Tall's. So, I mean, that was really exciting.
And everybody was asking me, what about Olsi Perry? What's his story? They were seeking for more. And for us, it was exciting that Olsi Perry was willing to share for the first time everything the Israeli audience did not know. What really happened? There is a void of 10 years that, imagine again, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar disappears for 10 years. Okay, that's how I can compare what happened to Olsi Perry. He was the icon. I would even say humbly more than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because
he was so beloved.
It's Israel,
yeah.
And it crosses from everywhere. So comparing to what John worked on right now, The Last Dance, I think it's nice how both Michael Jordan and Olsi spoke about their problems, about their flaws. They never tried to become bigger than life, even though in our view they are. The only difference is that Olsi is a little bit a better player than Michael Jordan, but let's leave it for now.
Yeah. But let's talk about The Last Dance.
Yeah, I mean, it's, what can I tell you? It's, obviously a career landmark. The project 4+ years in the making. Actually, more than that. I mean, it's really 22 years in the making because it started with NBA Entertainment and a guy named Andy Thompson, who's the brother of Michael Thompson, who actually played against Ulci at some point in some at a competition in the 70s.
It's unbelievable how much you know. It's like,
but people might know Klay Thompson, who's the shooting guard for the Golden State Warriors. Andy is his uncle, and he was a producer at NBA Entertainment. And there was this bizarre thing in the late '90s. The Bulls had won 5 championships in 7 years, and they were going to implode this dynasty. And it was like, it's still to this day kind of, how did that happen? And Andy had the great foresight and the idea, hey, let's follow this team with the Bulls, and asked Adam Silver, who was then the head of NBA Entertainment, and Adam Silver said, okay, it's a good idea, and went to Michael, and they made this agreement to say, hey, look, we'll shoot this, and neither one of us, the NBA nor Michael Jordan, can use it until the other one says yes. And so, all they did was win the championship on essentially a last-second shot by Michael Jordan, sort of had the most dreamy footage ever, but it, for a variety of reasons, was not able to get made. And I think, people have asked, why did it take this long? I don't know. I mean, I don't have insight into Michael Jordan's, inner thoughts. I think it was timing meets opportunity meets the world we live in, just from a creative standpoint. The story was so big that it would have been hard to sort of encapsulate it in an hour-long documentary. And so, market forces helped us, things like Making a Murderer and these longer form nonfiction storytelling made it a project that say, hey, we might be able to actually get 6, 8, 10 episodes out of this. And I think it was 20 years. We'd approached him, in my partner Mike Tolan. We actually went together to Toronto in the All-Star game in 2016. And we had sort of a meeting on the books with Esty Portnoy, whose father is Israeli, and Curtis Polk, who are Michael's longtime partners. The meeting went well. Mike went back to Charlotte a few months later. Michael said yes. 2 years later, we started the show, and 2 years after that, it ended up on the air. So that's the very long, short story.
Right. Okay, let's talk about pictures of his life.
Amos, to me, is one of the best ambassadors of the ocean. It takes huge amount of risks to bring those images which nobody else has ever been able to capture.
He comes back with images that no one can get. He is probably the best underwater still photographer in the world.
His story was always shrouded in mystery.
He doesn't have a normal life. He doesn't have children. He's married to the ocean.
He has this passion. He wants to be in the water, close to polar bear, swim with the biggest predator on Earth.
If the wind is too turbulent, we're not going to go there.
There's so many factors that can work against you.
All right, guys, we're taking off.
Amos and his team have only 5 days to find a polar bear and take the picture.
It's the one animal where humans are part of their food chain. People get eaten by polar bears.
He needs that adrenaline rush. He needs to be at the edge. And if he doesn't do it in one way, he'll do it in another way. And maybe his military background has part to do with it.
I wonder if there is some kind of unfinished business with the polar bear.
Believing in yourself and go all the way for it, no matter what obstacle. And this is all the power of big.
No.
Dani, please tell us about this project.
So it's a film that I co-directed with my friend Jonathan Neer, who I've done Dolphin Boy with. I tend to have partners named Jonathan or John. It's just my karma. But Jonathan and I were following Amos Nahum, who's an incredible wildlife photographer, who's shooting all the biggest creatures on Earth, but he does it face to face without protections, with no social distancing, with any of them. And there is one photography that he hasn't taken, and that's the polar bear underwater. And we are following him to the end of the world, to the Canadian Arctic, and on the attempt to take that picture. But it's more than the story of him taking that picture. It really is the story of his life. So when we call it the picture of his life, it has a double meaning. He's taking the picture of his life, but we are also telling the picture of his life because he was a soldier in the Yom Kippur. Amos was a soldier in the Yom Kippur War. And he saw
Israeli, we should say.
all the tragic things that an eye could ever seen and face. And what he has done with his PTSD, he transformed the gun with the camera. And from somebody who had to kill people in order to protect the country, he decided that he changes the lenses of the gun with the camera, and now he is becoming a soldier of Mother Nature, and he's showing the beauty of the world. He shows what happens to the environment, and that's why he wants to evoke that message by shooting the polar bear face to face without protections. Now, we're not going to tell you if he succeeded or not. You'll have to go to pictureofhislife.com because we're very excited. The film has just come out now in virtual cinema. Now everything is social distancing. There is no cinema. So we're doing it virtual cinema on pictureofhislife.com, and we just got unbelievable reviews at the Hollywood Reporters and the Chronicle, and CNN spoke about us this week. So we're extremely excited to bring another positive story from Israel.
Dani and John, thank you very much for joining us on Explore Israel.
Yeah.
This is another chapter of Explore Israel. Thank you for joining us, and best wishes.